Okay, I'd like to call this work session to order. Thank everybody for showing up. Ask that you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Norma, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Gilbert Lopez.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Hudson.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Huddleston.
Here.
Mayor John Thompson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jackie Henry. Here. Councilmember Gary Lewis.
Here.
And Councilmember Tatiana Murrieta. Here. Thank you.
And it looks like everybody's here. We have a quorum. We'll move on to discussion. Discussion on the airport master plan and 5-year improvement plan, and this is discussion only. There he is. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This is the first item I think that the council wanted to have a little discussion about before we get into the second item, which is really the underground storage tank replacement at the airport. I think for the benefit of the mayor and council, this is a good educational opportunity for us to talk about the Coolidge Airport, a little bit about its history, how it's funded, who manages the airport, who our tenants are, and give you just a brief description of our airport master plan, along with some of the capital improvements that are planned for the airport within the airport capital improvements plan that we work with the FAA and ADOT on pretty much every year. So let me start by just saying that as an airport, first of all, our airport is we have a very close relationship with the Federal Aviation Administration. We secure a lot of our funding to do improvements directly from the Federal Aviation Administration, as well as matching grant monies by the Arizona Department of Transportation. If you look at, in rough numbers, 90% of a grant project cost is paid for by FAA when you're dealing with a federal, state, local project. The other 5 is a local match and an ADOT match. So we have a very close working relationship with the FAA office out of Phoenix, as well as the ADOT offices. We have people assigned to our particular airport that we deal very closely with when it comes to design and engineering and environmental issues and so forth. Kimley Horn is the city's airport consultant when we talk about design and engineering services. We retained Kimley Horn a little over a year ago to be our design engineer on-call contractor. They came on board following the bankruptcy or the failure of our prior engineering company that was providing that service to the city. So they really stepped in and kind of helps us through this grant application process and making sure that we're complying with all the federal requirements when it comes to our airport capital improvements plan and so forth. The other company that we've used significantly in the past that recently completed our airport master plan. I think Jill provided a copy of the airport master plan to you, to the new council members. That was one of the last projects I think that Jill worked on. The airport master plan is a master plan somewhat similar to what our general plan, but it's specifically for the airport. We're required to do that master plan to identify both the short-term, intermediate, and long-range improvements that we plan on making at our airport. And I think that was one of the primary questions that came up at the council meeting recently is what plans do you have for the airport in the future in the way of improvements? I'd like to kind of talk about some of those planned improvements that are found in that master plan. If you want to delve into it at your own leisure and read it, there's a lot of information in there that will help you understand all of the issues related to the Coolidge Municipal Airport. But to start with, one of the most important parts of that planning document is the master plan concept. This illustrates the overall master plan, a very large airport property. As I was talking to FAA and ADOT officials, they say we're really blessed to have so much property because we really And by the way, most of that property is surrounded by state land. Give you a step back a little bit. We're trying to annex this property into the city limits. It's not currently in the city of Coolidge. We have some intervening land between our existing city limits and the airport property that's owned by the state of Arizona. I've been working very closely with the state land department over the last year and a half to try to bring this property into the city of Coolidge, and we're really close to doing that. Had we not got into these other two large pre-annexation development agreements, I think this would have already been done. That's not an easy process. It has to go through the state selection board, the governor, and the state lands commissioner, and several other, I think the attorney general and several other people are on that state selections board, and they have to convene a meeting to consider our annexations, and they haven't convened a meeting to consider anybody's annexation of any state land in any city for the last several years. So not an easy process, but we're really close to getting that done, and I would expect sometime this year we should be able to accomplish that task. So the city airport will be, in fact, in the city limits. That's really one of our primary directions. Again, there's some land down here on the south end of the airport property at the end of the abandoned runway that is that we currently lease from the state of Arizona. In this area, we, as I think we mentioned, I don't know if the new council was involved in that, but we currently lease property to Complete Parachute Solutions down here. They operate a military skydive training facility out of that. There's a south hangar building, and then there's a what they call the barracks building. This is the newer building, which is entirely on the airport property. The south hangar building actually encroaches slightly onto the state land, and so we're really obligated to continue to get a state land lease on this little piece of property down here from the state of Arizona. But the rest of the property, as you can see, follows this general alignment. And this is the entrance to the airport from the north off of the Coolidge Avenue extension. And then, of course, you come in around the existing 523 runway. This is runway 1735. At one time, back in the old days when this was the Army Air Base, they did have this other runway, which has since been abandoned. And of course, we recently renovated that abandoned runway to provide taxiway services in this area between 1735 and the CPS facility so they could get in and out of their facility without doing damage to their aircraft. This plan has a lot of information on it, and in your master plan you'll see that it identifies really a master plan concept of what we envision for the airport, including future extensions of runway 523 to the northeast, including additional taxiways and apron extensions, future aviation and non-aviation areas. We have a master plan or a land use plan over here I'll go over. We have identified in this area future hangars, T hangars, other hangars that potentially could derive some revenue for the airport. There's just a whole bunch of information that I'm not going to go over every aspect of it, but feel free to look at the plan. Really, when you're dealing with the airport, you have to, I think many of you said, is this kind of a money loser? Are we losing money on the airport operations? And I think today you could probably say, it's costing more than we're really receiving in terms of income off of land leases. And so we are spending money, but on the other hand, we're gaining a lot of money in terms of those improvements. This is an asset that most cities would die for in order to attract future industrial and employment. While it's costing us a little more today as we bring in the infrastructure and expand the opportunities at the airport, this will be a future employment center that will be very significant to the region. We do know that the north-south corridor, the north-south freeway corridor is planned just to the west of the airport property. As that goes in, I think that'll bring a greater awareness to the airport and its future potential. The other thing is the Phoenix Mart. We know that that's one of the largest sourcing centers of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, and there may be some opportunities as that thing begins to progress and they start having a great deal of international business. Who knows? Maybe someday with the expansion of the runway and the land that's available out here, we might be able to benefit from activities that might be spawned off of the Phoenix Mart. And so the Pinal County Comprehensive Plan that was done by Pinal County recognized that this area could be a potential future jet port. That's been discussed, to have that kind of a facility here, whether that's politically feasible, because typically when you talk about a jet port facility, you hear a lot of the opposition from some of the larger airports, including Phoenix Sky Harbor. But why couldn't we look at maybe doing a cargo type of facility or something like that that would be beneficial for the region? I don't think we should discount those ideas. So I think while it may cost us a little bit, long term it's an asset that we really need. I think if you look at the economic benefits of aviation in Arizona, there's lots of studies on that. You can look it up online. They're pretty tremendous benefits. We can recruit new businesses that rely on airport access and so forth. Other airports in this region, Eloy has an airport. They're not a whole lot different than ours. In terms of funding, they have a major operator at their airport, which is Skydive Arizona. Their primary niche there at their airport is sports skydiving. While they also have military skydiving operations out there. Our understanding is that those two types of activities don't necessarily coexist very well together because they're completely different types of skydiving activities. And I think that Mr. Hill, as I understand it, may even be building a facility in the Arizona City area to handle some larger aircraft to do military training. So there's a lot of interest in skydiving, a lot of interest in aviation. We're just part of that. Casa Grande has a very large airport that they continue to expand. We do receive from the Federal Aviation Administration $150,000 per year. That's our entitlement as a city. That's how much the FAA provides on an annual basis, and we can let that amount of money build up to a certain point, and then we need to really go after the grants to spend that money. But that's all we get really from the FAA, unless they have projects that are more expensive and they feel that our priorities are high enough or that rank high enough where they could spend a little more. A good example of that was the extension of Taxiway A just recently. That project was just about $1 million. Obviously that's more than $150,000, and so they spent a lot more in helping to facilitate the expansion of Taxiway A down here to the end of runway 1735 that was completed last year. Right now, we're working on a grant application to do our next set of improvements according to the Airport Capital Improvement Plan. We're going to be submitting an application for the expansion and renovation of Taxiway Bravo, which is contiguous to the apron out here on parallel with runway 523. We also, in our same application, requested the extension of Taxiway A adjacent to the apron in this location. As part of this process, the Federal Aviation Administration, they do not like our taxiway approaches to the airport. They come in at angles. You can see this little angle here off of the taxiway to the end of 523. Here's an angle. And then there used to be an angle down here, but they eliminated that. And then when they built Taxiway A down here on the south end, they did a run-up area, and then they come in at 90 degrees at the end of 1735. So these angles will go away. Taxiway Bravo will be extended, and we'll see a 90-degree access to the end of 523. Runway 523 right now is 5,528 feet by 150 feet wide. The ultimate runway conditions as the airport grows, the ultimate idea is to extend that runway to 8,100 feet. So you can see in our airport master plan a sizable expansion of the end of the runway 523 to the northeast out in this area, which would require a rerouting of the airport access road because it comes in here now. Obviously, that wouldn't work if this runway were extended. It would also require an extension of our runway protection zones out here. We already have them to the south, but out here in this area, which is all on the state lands property. And so that will actually introduce additional opportunities at our airport. Right now, when we did the master plan, and Jill can talk about this maybe, but when we did our master plan, they recategorized our airport. It used to be a Category 3 airport, now it's a Category 4 airport. The reason they pushed it as in a Category 4 airport is because we do have a lot of C-130 aircraft that come in and out of this facility with international air response. This Category 4 airport is a standard. Our airport runway meets that standard in terms of the strength of the runway and the length of the runway. So we were able to be reclassified, I think, which provides even better opportunities for us.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Go ahead, Councilman.
I was just wondering, is that plan right there, what page is that on in here? Jill, do you know?
If you look at I can tell you, but if you look at the appendix, it's going to be the airport, every one of these is titled. This is the master plan concept.
Thanks, Rick.
Master plan concept. There's a lot of maps in there. There's different alternative plans that when they do this master plan, they look at alternatives. But this is really the master plan concept that came out. The Federal Aviation Administration, while they accept that planning document, yes? Exhibit 5A. What page? Is there a page number? Okay. Exhibit 5A.
It's like 5-3, but it's not page number.
Okay. It's a fold-out map. The Federal Aviation Administration, when we do this master plan, which involves an extensive public participation process, I wasn't here when it was done, but Jill can talk a little bit about that if you have questions. But when we conclude that master plan process and the council accepts that master plan, it's submitted to the Federal Aviation Administration for their review and approval. In addition to that, the Federal Aviation Administration signs off on what they call an airport layout plan, the ALP. You'll hear people say ALP. In that report, there is a copy of the airport layout plan. It's one of the exhibits as well. And it basically is a plan that illustrates, what's there now and what's going to change in basically our long-range planning efforts. So they actually stamp the airport layout plan. This is the official signed FAA-approved copy of those plans right here. And so when these are like my little Bible. Whenever I'm dealing with the airport officials that come out, they always want to look at my ALP. This is the set of plans I bring out. I can, show them the master plan, but this is really what they really focus on. And it's really it provides a lot of information about our airport that pilots would be very interested in terms of the length of the runway and other, issues, the Category 4. There's a whole lot of information on here that a lot of your pilots and airport users would want to know. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, and I apologize for that, but let's talk a little bit about this grant again. So our next application for funding is for the taxiway Alpha and Bravo renovation and extensions. But we also have a grant that we've already been awarded that we're currently working with Kimley Horn on, and that is for runway 1735 mid-intensity runway lighting and signage. Some people might say, well, why do we need to light runway 1735? Is that a priority? Should we be doing that? I think people have different feelings about whether we should be lighting that runway or not. Is it that heavily used? It ranks very high in the way of grant funding, and it is in our master plan to do it as a project. It was one of the projects that we said we would do when we did the master plan, and we're doing it. We've applied for funding. That funding was approved, and Kimley Horn is in design. We'll be going out to bid very soon, hopefully, to do that project, to light runway 1735 and to do new signage out there. So that project's moving forward. The next project, again, that we're making application for now, again, was the taxiway improvements. By the way, we did get a categorical exclusion letter A categorical exclusion is an environmental approval letter, basically saying you don't have to do a full-blown environmental assessment, which will take a year or better to do. If you do a categorical exclusion on this particular next grant that we want to do, we're really not disturbing anything that hasn't already been disturbed, so they recognize that it is eligible for categorical exclusion. And so we've already got that letter from the FAA that recognizes we don't have to do any further environmental review for this next grant. Later down the road, if you look at in your plan, there's a development staging. They have short-term, intermediate, and long-range projects. They're all color-coded. You can see the majority of the projects on this map over here that are in red are those that we've been working on in our 5-year plan. And all of those relate to the taxiway improvements, pretty much on the air side. The next group of improvements in yellow, that's when we start looking at the potential for taxiway and runway extensions. Some of these other taxiway accesses in here, down here off the air side, off the taxiway A, as well as potentially acquiring some of these runway protection areas for future expansion of these. Long term, in the blue, you can see that's where we're, ultimately expanding runway 523 and maybe making some improvements on the north side of runway 523 that don't currently exist there. So this plan changes. This plan is much like our general plan. The next time we have to update it, we'll be going back out for public input. Some of these priorities here may change. We get everybody together and we decide, maybe the next priority is to do. I think a priority would be to have some nice restroom facilities out there and a pilot's lounge. That'd be nice. But you got to think about some of these improvements that you're planning for. They have to rank. They have to be competitive. You don't want to put things in the plan that aren't going to be competitive from a grant funding standpoint. Some of these things you might have to do on your own, like the fuel tanks. There's no funding, no grant funding to do fuel tanks. I asked. That was the first thing I wanted to find out, is if we could get some federal funding to help us with the cost, that would be a little easier to do. They said there's no funding for that. You can potentially go to the Arizona Department of Transportation and get a loan through their, they've got a fuel tank loan program. So if we can't get our own financing to do the fuel tanks, we could go as a last resort potentially to ADOT to get that loan. Problem with that is I think that we probably wouldn't get quite as good of interest rate that we've enjoyed using some of the local banks, and we'd have a little more bureaucracy to deal with, I think, if we went after that kind of funding. So we're really trying through LISA to get funding for the underground storage tanks that we'll talk about later through a local loan program, a local bank. One of the things that's really important when it comes to airport management and operations, and I'm learning a lot of this. I was not an airport manager until I took this job, and it's been kind of an interesting experience. Let me tell you, I've learned a lot. I have a lot more to learn, and I'm in no way an expert, and I'll admit that right now. This has been quite an experience, and it's been a challenge, and it's been a lot of fun because while there's a lot of disagreement on how this thing should operate out there, not only maybe amongst yourself, amongst tenants out there that feel differently about how things should be managed, but I think it's okay to have these conversations to find out what's going to be best in the long run. But one of the things that we really should never give up on, really, and I think FAA will always recommend that we really want to make sure that we try to continue to receive that we maintain some kind of control over the revenue generators for our airport. Right now our revenue generators are land leases, and those land leases are very long term, and for the most part, with the exception of one of the leases, everything that you see being done out there, Mr. Recker's here, he's our fixed based operator that we have an agreement with. He's invested a great deal of money in private hangars out there that he manages and controls and leases out. We lease him the land for those hangars at a certain square footage per, a certain number of cents per square foot. He puts up the money to build the hangars, and he is in business providing hangars at our airport for people that want to bring airplanes in out here. Those are his hangars on our property, and at the end of the lease, those hangars become city's property. You have a question about that?
Yeah, can I, is that all right? I was just wondering, how long is that lease, and how much you said we lease the land to Mr. Recker?
Coolidge Aviation is one of our tenants, correct.
How long is that lease, how long do we have left on it, and how much do we make?
Well, those are all good questions, and I wish I had all the answers to that, but I can get that. Generally we're making, the most we make is on a CPS lease, and it's about 28 cents a square foot, if I remember. Is that about right, Jill? Somewhere in the 20-some cents a square foot? I think looking at the information, about over 20 cents a square foot for the CPS lease. Mr. Recker, we recently leased him some land for parcel 2, which is the parcel adjacent, this little L-shaped piece of orange parcel here. It sits between the Mr. Recker's office and the International Air Response hangar. That parcel 2, I believe we leased for 10 cents a square foot. Wasn't that right, Charlie? About 10 cents a square foot. We have Terry Glass, who has this group of buildings here. And by the way, this particular lease, these buildings don't become the city's at the end of the lease. Mr. Glass has to decide at the end of his lease whether he wants to remove those buildings, take them with him, or take them down, or figure something else out for the city. But those buildings do not belong to the city at the end of his lease. And he only leases that ground for about 4 cents a square foot. He probably pays the least amount of rent per square foot, and he pays the least amount of square footage rent for land of anybody on the airport property at the present time.
How long is his lease?
Most of these leases have to be, and in fact, you can look in the master plan. It talks about this leasing program. Most of these leases have to be done 30 to 40 years or longer, because they can't get financing to do these projects. He couldn't get financing to build all these hangars out here unless he had a long-term lease. No bank would lend him the money to do that if the lease was real short-term, because there's not enough revenue to pay off his debt without having a long-term commitment in the way of a lease with the city.
Okay.
Most of these are 30 years, 40 years,
Yeah, 25,
30 years. Okay. Okay.
right.
So they're long-term.
Okay, but everything's fixed, no rate changes?
No, in those leases,
No,
there's
there's-
generally an escalator in those lease agreements
Okay.
based on the inflationary adjustments.
Gotcha.
So there's escalators in those.
And Rick, it's not so much of what you get for the land or the rent factor, it's the investment that these people are putting in and the dollar amount of these buildings and everything, what the city's going to recuperate after 30 or 40 years.
Right, I think you have to look at that as these are improvements that are being made on somebody else's dime that ultimately become ours, and we're still getting a little bit of a lease out of it. But we have some commitments as an airport, as a city-owned airport. We have certain commitments that I think we have to continue to fulfill. These people relied on the city to provide certain services out there. One of those services are fuel. We have to, if we didn't have fuel out there, these people would be in a world of hurt. Charlie can talk about that tonight, and maybe some of the other tenants, if they'd like to talk about that. CPS, when they do their training, they have planes that come in and out of here. They fuel up their planes out here. And other people fuel up their airplanes. People that lease these hangars through Charlie rely on the city to have fuel out there so they can fly in and out of the airport. We make a nickel a gallon through our agreement with Mr. Recker, through Coolidge Aviation. We make a nickel a gallon for every gallon of fuel sold. And if you look at that as compared to other cities, it's all over the board. Some cities are less than a nickel, some cities are more. I've seen some, looking at some of the information that people had looked at before, you can see those rates go up as high as 20 cents a gallon.
I have a question.
Vice Mayor.
When you say the city makes 5 cents a gallon, that's not for everyone, right? Is my understanding that International Air Response,
Correct.
we do not get that money?
Yeah, for any because they're a fixed-based operator, anything that International Air Response, if they're fueling their aircraft, they're not paying the nickel a gallon to the city because they are our FBO. So International Air Response, Coolidge Aviation, they do not pay the nickel a gallon. That's correct.
What's the percentage of how many gallons are sold?
Okay, good question. One of the things I'd like you to know is over the last several years, even since basically since 2000, we've never sold, the city's revenue from the sale of gasoline at a nickel a gallon has never gone over $5,000 a year. We don't make, so our average is around $3,000 to $4,000 a year in revenues on fuel sales at a nickel a gallon. So you can do the math and figure out, about how many gallons are sold to people outside of Coolidge Aviation and International Air. The biggest user of gasoline at the airport right now, without question, probably half of the fuel consumption is from our tenant down here, CPS. Charlie, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I talking to them the other day that they're a big user of our fuel.
And you mentioned our obligations and commitments, because I want to make sure that obviously we want to fulfill our commitments. What are we contractually obligated to concerning the fuel issues?
I'm gonna maybe ask contractual obligations regarding the fuel. What if the fuel just ceased to flow out there tomorrow? What would the potential liability, or would we be violating any contractual obligation if we stopped fueling?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Holston, I'd have to look. I haven't looked at the agreement to look for that issue before, but something I think is in my memory is there's something about us providing fuel or a way for planes to receive fuel in the FBO agreement. I'm trying to pull it up right now while we're talking, but I can take a look at that.
Okay.
Can I, Rick, how much, I think it would help me tremendously, and I don't know how much longer your presentation is going to run.
I'm going to stop pretty quick here.
But I would like to hear from EDQ, the Arizona Department.
Yeah, I was going to kind of wait and reserve that for the issue of the fuel tank contract, if you like, unless you have some other questions.
So do we want to hold the discussion, Bob, until we get to the business item of it, or we're just going in the presentation now?
Yeah, we're just working on the improvements in the master plan, but
So
you can cut that short if you want.
Well, no, I know I have, there's a lot of new members that need the information, but I have certain questions that are going to direct me one way or the other in how I vote on this. You can debate. I agree, Councilmember Huddleston. I don't know. I suppose there's airports in Arizona without fueling stations. I don't know if we want to be one of those. And regardless, I guess my point is, regardless of that, those tanks are obviously an issue with the state, so we're going to have to deal with them one way or the other.
We're going to get into that in just a second.
Okay.
I really, for this presentation, I want to kind of give everybody up to speed on the kind of the history of the airport master plan. And, I think the document that was passed out to you tonight, if you take a look at that, read it. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. In fact, I invited Jim Harris to come here. He's the one that helped us with the master plan to answer some technical questions if you have them, but he's always available to address issues. We're going to have to redo our master plan eventually and update it and get it reapproved by the FAA. And we'll, so it's a continuing, things change. And but let's get into, if it's okay, is there any questions else that you have about the airport master plan?
Rick and Mayor, if I may, just touch on real quickly the importance of the airport when we look at economic development and also for the future, and how it played a role in the creating of the general plan that we just went through with public adopted. I think this resource was listed, I believe, in there. And
it is.
And so that's really important. The public approved that plan, so it's
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Yes, you're correct. The airport was identified in the city's general plan, which the voters just recently approved, and it is out there as a primary employment center. One of the things that you really enjoy with the airport is that it's going to be employment. It's not going to be residential. We really are not going to have homes in the vicinity of the airport. Our future around the airport is going to be primarily industrial and commercial properties. With the north-south freeway corridor, like I talked about, just being slightly to the west of this property, the potential for commercial and industrial development in relation to the airport long-term is huge. That's an asset out there that is just waiting to be developed. We have challenges, though. We talked about power issues and other wastewater, water infrastructure. We're not going to take care of those challenges overnight, but we need to start working on solutions.
Mr. Miller, we also, the county designated it as a regional airport on their plan, long range?
Yeah, I'm not sure that they necessarily designated this airport itself, but a regional jetport was identified in this same area, yes.
So stands to reason that we have a fairly decent chance if we were to go that route in the future.
Absolutely, and
You have the resources or the partnerships to do it.
correct. And I think the beautiful thing about this area and an airport, a jetport, is it's relatively undeveloped. And that's what, when you start to have those encroachments and those issues, then you start to lose your opportunities. When it comes to, Casa Grande right now, when I was there, fights after fights about encroachment of residential too close to the airport. Across Pinal Avenue, you have Valago, which is a little bit too close for comfort, and people begin to complain about airplane noise and issues related to airports, and you have these conflicts. Well, out here you don't. And as long as we can plan properly and keep those conflicts away, you're going to have quite an asset out here that you for a long time.
I think we would all love to see the airport blossom. Question, the grant for building up runway 1735 with Kimley Horn, how much will that cost us as far as the budgeting?
Okay, well, it's I'll give you a kind of an idea. First of all, the last improvement that was done out here was the resurfacing of runway 1735. That was done through the Arizona Pavement Management System program. Those monies are obtained through aircraft registrations across the state. Those are aircraft revenues and fees that are generated and then put back into airports. So we weren't out any money from them to go in here and mill. They milled this entire 1735 and they resurfaced it, as well as part of this taxiway over here going out to 523. Beautiful improvement. Cost us, it was a little bit of a match. Was it 10% or 5? Do you remember, Jill? 10%. It was probably less than $30,000. I don't have the number, but it was peanuts in the scheme of the overall project cost. 10%. And likewise, and that information, I can get you that information, but it's, this project for taxiway A extension was, when you looked at the design and the construction, was upwards of $1 million. The feds put 90% of that, $900,000 for simple terms, was paid for by the federal government. The other 10% was shared between the state and the city, so we probably had 50 and they had 50 into it. $50,000 for $1 million investment's a pretty good investment.
Pretty cheap.
We couldn't do it ourselves for that price.
I suppose that depends if you have $50,000.
Are you done?
I'm done.
Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, so I think what we'll do now, if there's no other questions, I think I'd like to kind of go into the next agenda item to talk about the underground storage tanks, to kind of get everybody up to speed on that. And I'm going to go back over here.
And while he's transitioning there, the old hangar, the city council had authorized the reconstruction of the old hangar, which is a 1942 hangar, unlike any, if you saw the movie Pearl Harbor, you probably saw a wood truss hangar of that sort. There are very few of them in the world, but that's been totally renovated, again, thanks to the businesses at the airport, Charlie and and his construction business, we were able to cut the costs, and now that old 1942 hangar is rehabbed short of the front door, which is being worked on.
I have a quick question, if I may. The hangars that were put on by Charlie or whoever's in charge, I can't remember the name. What's the lifespan of those hangars before a major overhaul is going to need to be done?
I think Charlie might be better able to address that, but these are all metal hangars. You know, the hangar that's out there was built in the 40s, and it's a wooden one, which probably is going to deteriorate much faster than the metal hangars. They're simple clamshell hangars, the ones that you're doing. Do you have an expected life on those, Charlie?
In the dry area we're in, we should be looking somewhere between 50 and 60.
Yeah.
They take 40 years in the Florida area where salt and water conditions.
It's a good question. Yeah, for everybody, you know, what he said is, you know, typically in Arizona in a drier climate where you have less humidity, less rust and corrosion, they're going to probably last, 40, 50 years versus some of those other climates.
So at the end of the lease, we're going to have about 20 years before we have to probably replace them once they become ours.
And keep in mind that, over those years, we're seeing an escalation in the land value of the lease of the land. The other option we have, if we had lots of money as a city, which we don't right now, but I would love to see the city get into the hangar business. Some cities do. Some cities derive revenue directly from hangar leases. That's one of your revenue generators. The other, if we had enough of a staff and funding to have full-time personnel out there to administer the fuel and to order the fuel and to do the monitoring the fuel tanks and all of that other stuff, we probably should have the fuel system, and we could derive all the profits off of the fuel. But we don't sell enough fuel out there as it is to really pay for someone full-time out there today. I think maybe someday, as the airport grows, that might be something we would consider or should consider. So fuel sales, hangar rentals, tie-down rentals, those are some of your primary revenue generators for the airport that you really don't want to give away. But under our circumstances today, we really can't afford to do those things ourselves.
I think it's important to remember that's basically been our whole approach to the airport since I've been on the council, and Gilbert's been on here 2 years longer than I have. We haven't had any money. And so that's why we're in the situation we're in on how we've got accomplished. We have to do it that way because we haven't had the necessary funding. Through grants and through the fixed-based operator and credits is how we've managed to get as far as we've gotten. So that's why we're where we're at. For those of you up here on the council that wonder why we're doing it the way we're doing it, if we didn't do it this way, it will still be the way it was when certain members of this council used to go out back there and party 30 or 40 or 50 years ago maybe. So I'm just saying that's why we're where we're at right now. Again, if we were Scottsdale or Paradise Valley, and I'm sure we would have looked at a lot of other options would have been available. We didn't have those options.
Eventually, we'll grow into those options. I think we will. And I think we've got some really good partnerships out there. I got to tell you, with the Terry Glass and G&H Aerospace and Coolidge Aviation and International Air Response and Complete Parachute Solutions and Safford Aviation, all these companies are ambassadors to us. And Charlie, over the years, I've only known him a couple of years since I've been here, has done a lot at the airport in terms of things that we would normally have to do ourselves. Mowing. When I understood at one time, you couldn't see the runways from his office because of the brush and overgrowth. That's all been cleared. It's very clear and very clean. It's an amenity that a lot of people really enjoy. You want to come out there and go to the fly-ins the first Saturday of the month and just talk to the people that come in and visit our airport. saying what an asset we have and what a great place to visit it is. I think it's credit to what the council's been able to do with limited revenues, what some of our tenants have been able to do to help improve that area. It's really an effort that everybody should be complimented on.
And before we move off of this particular area, Mr. Fitzgibbons, have you been able to find the contract or the information that Councilmember Huddleston was requesting?
Yeah, I pulled up one of the agreements, but I didn't try to go over to a
And it
computer. I
was
can't see
about, was it the term or the amount of money we were getting per square foot on the lease?
Well,
Because I know the terms have extensions.
right, exactly. The
There's
original
options
agreement
on
was
the
done.
30.
The
Yeah.
original agreement was done, I think, in September 2003.
But
then
it
there's
was
been-
extended time and
right.
time again whenever it would come before this council over the years. So it could have been, I don't know, Mr.
Different
Anderson,
parts have
Charlie
been
sitting there, he could
extended,
tell
yeah.
us, probably as recently as a couple of years ago, it got a 30-year renewal, if you will, plus the extensions,
Well, yeah, different
different
parts.
things.
Yeah, different, when they were going over different parts of the airport, yeah.
So I guess we're not going to have that right now, so maybe we need to, Rick, or you?
Well, let me tell you something that has really kind of made me lose a lot of my hair.
Let's not talk about that.
I've been reading these leases, and they're not the easiest to read. They're not the easiest to understand because they're amended over the years, and you have an original lease, and you have a First Amendment, a Second Amendment, a Third Amendment, and people change, and then it gets amended. And so we have a record of all of this information, but you really have to almost read them from the beginning, and it's not an easy process. I've been working on it, trying to understand it. I work closely with Jill and Lisa, who have more knowledge of these leases, as they were here when most of them were negotiated, but they're not. I mean, we can get you copies of them, but it's, even for me that looks at them pretty frequently, not an easy thing to understand.
It's good reading, though.
Yeah.
But we're more than happy to get those for you, if you'd like them.
If you have a hard time reading through it, it's going to be Chinese to me. No, it would be helpful just to know what we're obligated to do, and I want to make sure that we, whatever we do, we're responsible to fulfill our obligations. If we said we'd do something, we want to do it. And
I don't know what would happen, and I'm not going to predict, but if we have a company out there that has a $7 to $10 million contract with the Marine Corps to do military training, and all of a sudden they have no fuel to fuel their airplanes at that facility, I would think that they would have a real concern about that.
They have a $7 to $10 million contract. Can they afford fuel?
I don't. I guess if they could have planned for that, had they known that they were going to have to do that. But if they bought into a facility that had those amenities, and relied on those amenities in deciding what their plan was going to be, could they afford it? Perhaps. I think any one of them out there, if they wanted to get in, I don't think anything stops somebody from going out there and putting their own fueling facilities in.
No, we stopped them. I think we've stopped them before.
Do we have something in our
Because
rules?
we wanted to collect.
Okay.
Yeah, Stinger Welding was one.
Well, in our airport standards, you have to get a permit to put your own. In fact, they came in to apply for a permit to put in their own fueling facilities, and we will allow people to do that.
we will or we won't?
We will. We were going to with Stinger Welding.
We'll allow other companies to put a fuel
Well,
tank.
I mean, is it
We denied it before.
So I don't know if they came in afterwards with you.
well, they did come in with me at one time. I don't know what basis we would have to deny them on, but
Well, what I'd like to know is, Dennis, legally, I mean, don't we have an obligation to the fixed base operator or no?
Yes, we have a contractual.
So if we let everybody
selling fuel.
and their brother come in and sell fuel, doesn't he have some way he can come after us in court on violating the
I think
contract?
that's a whole topic for, I think, an executive session or something like
Well-
that.
well, it
But
may-
I think he is our fixed-based operator, and he is the one we have entered into the agreement with to be the fixed-based operator and to provide fuel for other people that come into the airport.
Okay, and I'm sure you're right, because you're the attorney, but what I'm thinking is, what I'm trying to read between the lines is there might be some people here that think we don't need more fuel out there, and I want to get that out there right now that I think we do. I think we need to have fuel out there because I think we're contractually obligated to do that. And so,
Well, and I think, I mean, there's a couple different ways to come at that answer, but I think Rick is, I mean, if you ever want to attract people to the airport, especially a company like CPS, they're going to expect certain things at the airport, one of them being fuel. And I think CPS just renewed their agreement with us for fixing part of the runway and things like that. I think if we had an intent to get out of the fuel business, we potentially probably wanted to give them some notice of that, or at least let them be able to plan for that or something like that. And also, I'm sure Mr. Recker and Coolidge Aviation would like to know and be able to plan for something like that.
You know, when we got into the 24/7 ability to gas up the planes with a credit card, it required a computer system, and they looked to us to supply a $17,000 system, and then the fixed base operator said he would put it in and monitor it. So Charlie built that system, a computer system to monitor the fuelage.
Okay, if I could interrupt. All well and good. I'm not even asking questions about eliminating it. What I, come from a perspective of supply and demand and free market, capitalism. If we have a contractual obligation that says no one else has access to put a fuel tank in here, then he can raise the price all he wants, right? But if you have competition in there, then he's obviously going to bring his price down on the fuel consumption. That's all I'm asking about. Not only that, but it bleeds over into, you mentioned bathrooms and, doing things to renovate. From my perspective is, you've got excellent businessmen out there. Why are we wanting to pay for, from the government standpoint, why wouldn't they just say, hey, let me do it. Let me make the improvements, and why wouldn't we say, go for it?
Well, on a lot of them, Councilmember, that's how they've gone. I mean, a lot of the improvements at the airport have come through that, where they have put up their own private money, and we've given them rent credits and things like that to make those improvements. But, I mean, it's usually part of us trying to give them some type of rent credits and things like that for them to make those types of improvements at the airport.
Okay. So, but at this point, no one else can go out there, contractually, no one else can go out there.
Well, the city would have to agree to it. I mean, if some company, and you have to, I mean, a lot of these are long 50-page agreements. We'd have to talk about it. But to me, if Boeing at one time wanted to come to our airport, and part of what they wanted to bring and build, but part of it they wanted to sell their own fuel, I still think it's the city's choice who supplies fuel out there. And so that might be something we'd want to look at and evaluate. And it might be at the end of the day our right to say, in that type of an agreement, yeah, we want to give them the right to do that because that was integral to bringing them to the airport.
Okay, thanks.
Why haven't we done any of these kind of agreements when it comes to the fuel tanks? Because, I mean, I'm not a math genius, but spending $17,000 a year on something we're making maybe $3,000 to $4,000 doesn't make sense to me when I know whoever's supplying the gas is probably making a lot more than we are. So it's kind of, if we're putting in the work and putting in the money, why are we receiving so little for it? Instead of giving them the option, put the tanks in, give them a break, give them some kind of credit like we do with everything else, instead of eat $500,000. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand.
I think part of it goes with the liability. I mean, I think when you're dealing with underground tanks, there's a lot of liability. And I think from a city perspective, since it's our airport and we have specific obligations, we're going to want to control the tanks, control the replacement of the tanks, control putting the tanks in to make sure that that is all done properly so that we don't create a lot more liability for the city of Coolidge.
Wouldn't the city still have control over if it's done properly or not? We have codes. Would that not fall under the same?
Right, but if somebody else is monitoring from them forward and things like that, I mean, sure, we might get copies of those reports and everything, but I think at the end of the day, we've always, I think the city originally put them in 30 years ago. They've always been the city's tanks. They've always been the city's responsibility.
Mayor and members of council, we do have some expertise here that's been in the fuel business, operations business for many, many years. And Mr. Keith Lecker here just informed me that Title 16 under the Federal Aviation Administration rules basically allows the cities to retain an FBO, much like we've done, to sell fuel to the public that are coming in and out of our airport. And generally, if another company out there wants to have their own fuel tank for their own use, not to sell to the public, that we can permit them to do that. If they want, if Terry Glass, for instance, wants to have his own fuel tank for his facility, not to sell to people that might be leasing, using the airport out of his facility, as I understand it, he can but for his own use, or complete parachute solutions for their own business use, they can have those facilities. I think that the cost and the risk involved, though, and we'll talk about that with ADEQ in a minute, and they're here, I don't think that you're going to find with the level of gasoline that's sold at our airport, there's going to be too many people that are going to want to do that. So not yet, maybe eventually.
Right.
But we do have people here, and I'd kind of like to get into the kind of the discussion and where we've been. If we can kind of go back, and I know at the last meeting we talked a lot, and this time I tried to provide a whole lot of additional information in your staff report. We have a lot of attachments in there about fuel tanks, and about we have letters there from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality expressing concerns. We have tank thickness test results that came back. There's a whole lot of issues, but let me start kind of back at the basics and let you know where we are. We have tanks that have been in the ground entirely too long, 30 years. As I understand it, in talking to the ADQ, we have a ticking clock that started ticking about 6 years ago or maybe longer, when we failed our thickness test in terms of our liability out there. We have done tank tightness tests, and I believe in talking with our consultants that we probably don't have leaks going on right now, but we have a risky situation. And we have a situation that is right now, and ADEQ can talk about this, that's currently in violation of FAA rules. There was a new rule that came out not long ago, I guess in the FAA, that said if you have a tank older than a certain number of years, you must get rid of it. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's got to come out of the ground, and I think maybe we can have them address that. So we have a situation that I just can't express my concern enough to you that we need to get these out of the ground. We started talking about this a couple of years ago in budget discussions, and my initial thought was to put these above ground. Let's put them above ground. Let's don't worry about them being underground. In order to put them above ground, we were talking about where would be the appropriate location to do that. And in talking with Charlie and others, we felt that we don't want above ground tanks right there in the grass area up against the apron. They probably ought to be set back in the parking area. We could pipe to the dispensers. It'd be a little more aesthetically pleasing primarily, but why not move them back there? In order to do that, we were going to incur some environmental studies that weren't anticipated that would potentially extend the replacement of these tanks by at least a year to a year and a half. And then the cost of that environmental study would be in addition to what it would cost to put the tanks in above ground at the preferred location. If we put them above ground right over where they are today, we probably wouldn't have the environmental study and we wouldn't necessarily have any delays, but we would have a challenge with taking our existing tanks offline during the construction period, installing the new tanks, and then we'd be out of fuel for a while. We'd have to figure out some way through a supplier to have tanks on skids or fuel tanks or fuel trucks or whatever else. That could add to the cost. So what we ended up doing is we decided that we were going to put them immediately adjacent to the underground tanks and put them back underground, because the tank technology today is far superior to what we have out there. We have single wall tanks. The new technology, we're talking about dual wall tanks with interstitial space with state-of-the-art fuel leak detection systems that send off alarms for any water that gets in that space or fuel that gets in that space. The technology is so much superior today. The other thing with the technology with the underground tanks that we would introduce into this system is right now we have a very inefficient system. Charlie's got to go out there with a stick and stick a measuring stick in these tanks and measure the fuel levels, and he has to do that at least 23 times a month, I believe, in order to get the proper readings to look at how much fuel is put in, how much is taken out. It's called an SIR, and we have to report all of this information monthly. And of course, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, they're responsible for making sure that we do these things. With this new system, this new technology, we wouldn't necessarily have to do this antiquated system, and we'll let the guys that put these tanks in talk about how that will save us time and effort. We went out initially and did a request for proposals to get new tanks put in. That was the wrong course. Susanna talked about that. She said, Rick, you bonehead, you're doing it the wrong way. You need to go out when we're doing a design build project. You have to go out and you have to do a request for qualifications first. And we then from the request for qualifications, we select who we believe to be the most qualified, the most knowledgeable about our airport, and a whole lot of other criteria. And you select the most knowledgeable firm, and then you go out and you negotiate a contract, a scope and a contract and a price. And so that's what we've done. The council has already approved the RFQ to hire Fry Construction, who's teamed up with Complete Fuel Aviation Systems and Pearson Engineering to provide the type of fuel facility that we need at our airport. We've already selected them. The council has done that. Now what we did the other night and what we're asking you to do tonight is to approve the contract with Fry Construction to have them build the system that we have budgeted for. Lisa talked about, you know, we budgeted for this. Our budget includes a 10-year payback based on our budget of $500,000, a 10-year loan. She's trying to secure that loan right now from a local bank or a bank in the area. And if that fails, we can always go to ADOT to maybe go through their loan program. But Lisa, she may have some additional information to provide tonight on where we are in the financing. But we're really at the point where we need the council to decide on this scope and to move forward with this contract with Fry Construction, teamed up with Complete Aviation Systems and Pearson Engineering to get these tanks installed in the ground. The estimate that we have in that contract is for a total cost of $495,568.98, paid for over a 10-year period through a loan. I would like, because you've heard enough from me, I would like to have, we have a couple of officials that are extremely interested in what we're doing with these tanks from an environmental standpoint. They have been writing me letters, as I said at the last meeting. I got a letter right after the last meeting, and I'm going to continue to receive letters from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality until we either decide to get out of the business and stop fueling and get those tanks out of the ground, or replace them with tanks that are appropriate and safe and proper for the environment. And so I think I'd like to spend some time, turn over to Travis, right, Travis, with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, if that's okay, Mayor. Would that be okay? And you can ask him questions?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Welcome, Travis.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. Again, my name is Travis Barnum with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, and specifically I'm the manager of the Tanks Inspections, Compliance and Enforcement Unit. As Rick stated, current state right now with the tanks, Mr. Danny Gonzalez, who's one of my inspectors, has been working with Mr. Miller, and an inspection that we performed in November of 2014 did find some issues, and Mr. Miller is being cooperative. He's working with us trying to reconcile some of those violations. One of the things that Mr. Miller had brought up was the SIR. That's the Statistical Inventory Reconciliation. That's a fancy way of talking about it being a leak detection method. So one of the things we have is there's a requirement for monitoring that, and right now we have the last 12 months of data being inconclusive. So it's something that we want to have corrected and worked through. With this case coming up and starting to dive into it a little bit deeper, we found out from one of our former inspectors who had done an inspection earlier on and reviewed some documents that you had, I believe it was the fiberglass tank that was had to have its interior inspection done in 2009, and it was determined that it was insufficient, that it also needed to be worked on, and our team had been kind of giving a chance to, and Keith, you can correct me, I believe it was to try to work something out, and so we kind of gave a little bit of grace period to see what was going to happen, because I believe even back then there was talk of, are we going to try to fix...
As far as every 5 years re-inspecting the internal lighting,
Mm-hmm.
it was marginal in 2009. The inspector said it will not pass the next 5 years, which is now due.
Right.
And the AEQ at that time gave you a letter saying, we'll accept this, but you guys need to get a plan. And that's when we started talking about putting fuel systems in at the airport.
Thanks.
So again, discovering that, realizing like, oh wow, we've had something now that we're looking at 6 years that has gone by now, and so so when Ms. Miller asked us to come down for tonight's special session, we definitely agreed because we wanted to make sure you understood the concerns we have as the state agency. As you may or may not know, our primary mission at ADQ is to protect human health and environment, and from what we can see from the data and just some of the simple facts is that you have 2 single wall tanks installed in 1982, so they're over 30 years old. And what we do know is there's not a single manufacturer out there of tanks that we know that would warranty their tanks after 30 years. So we know when we talk about the ticking is that you're now playing with the time of tanks that if they're only warranted for 30 years, that typically tells us they believe that they won't hold up much longer after that. So at this point, it's more of a risk gamble of when are they going to fail, because you've gotten your 30-year life out of your tanks, and now the question is kind of now what? Now, of course, there are the ability to do relinings and things of that nature to rehab the tank, but again, there's always concerns with relining. There's several conversations right now. I cannot say it as fact, but concerns with relining and also with fuel mixes with ethanol being in there and the integrity of that relining. It's a very controversial subject, and I can't make an official stand on it. But again, there's enough activity out there that we're even concerned about trying to reline these tanks. So the main thing I want to make sure you understand is there's 2 facts that I think that you're up against: time, and then the second one is obsolescence, which is you have single wall systems, and EPA Act in 2005 stated that all underground storage tanks should have a secondary system. So in this sense, be a double walled where you have the interstitial monitoring, because if you do have a failure in your tank, instead of it going right to the environment, you have your secondary containment, and then you have time to correct it before it actually gets out to the environment. So those are the statements I just wanted to be able to provide tonight. And then, of course, I understand you had some questions, and I'll try to answer as best as I can.
Well, thank you, Travis, for appearing here. We really appreciate it. I know Rick has mentioned a couple of times how much he enjoys your correspondence, and that I do have a question. You guys have been very forgiving, and we really appreciate it. A lot of us, at least I'll speak for myself, and I'm sure some of the others have done research on these tanks, and initially I was kind of in favor of putting them in ground, but I haven't heard from the insurance people or the finance people, anybody of that nature, but I do know that above ground tanks have advantages and disadvantages, and what I'm wondering is if we decide to go with an above ground tank and we would have to discuss it with Fry, I guess, and see what the situation is. But, and it took a little more time. Do we have a little more time, or are you giving us a time limit before the fines start flying?
So we do have in our compliance and enforcement process is where we can do a bilateral agreement called a consent order. So, Mr. Mayor, what we could probably work out is create a time schedule that would bring you into compliance.
Okay.
So there would be ways of trying to work that out.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Does anybody, go ahead, go on.
Just when we look at above ground or below ground tanks, and with technology that exists now, and in our heat and the weather that we have, and the fact that those tanks are in an area where there's a lot of state ground, they're actually open for hunting. I've gone hunting out there for deer, and you've got high-powered rifles, all that type of thing, and the fact that you can put them underground safely. We have them in Phoenix, all in Glendale. I just saw a new Circle K got built. The tanks are in the ground. They stay cool at the temperature of the ground. So they're really, I don't know that what advantage it would be except to have them above ground. I mean, I understand that there may be some, but I think out there, personally, as Mayor said, I would think, and especially in the fact that we're looking at if we change the location because we can't put them above ground right where they're at, they're in the apron. So if we actually go to a different location, we're looking at $150,000 more money, plus a year or more for the environmental review process, which takes a long time to clear all that. And right now, the environmental reviews, as far as I know, are taking a long time. I'm having to deal with that in Glendale, and they're not quick. I mean, you have all these steps, you have to confer with everybody, and it's just a long process. And so we have the opportunity to fix this quickly and get them in the ground, take the old tanks out. So that's why I kind of think in favor of that approach, is to quickly take care of the issue. We've been working on it 2 years. The tanks are out of the way, and they're being monitored properly. So that's kind of where I'm going with it, because it's aesthetically pleasing, also because you don't see these big tanks unless you want us to be able to see that we have tanks. But I think above underground is safer. Also for planes, if they come through and somebody runs past, hit them. I mean, anyway, that's my opinion. I just wanted to throw that out there. I know you can't vouch for the above ground or below because they're both technically sound if they're put in right. So,
right, Councilmember Lopez, just do want to make one clarification about underground storage tank and above ground storage tank. Is above ground storage tank could still be sub-grade in a voltage, what we call a voltage system. So you would, I guess, in the hunting scenario, or as far as an eyesore, you could have an above ground system that is still below grade.
Like a sunken freeway.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I got something. Not necessarily a question, just more information like Mr. Lopez did. Just in what I've been listening to, I could tell you what I'm kind of understanding the advantages versus disadvantages. If you have an above ground tank, if it needs replaced in 30 years, we don't have to dig all the way into the ground now. It's above ground. It's probably easy to replace that. If there happens to be a major leak, we just have surface contamination versus all this fuel underground possibly contaminating water sources, anything that happens to be underneath and harder to get to versus above ground. Hunting scenarios, I know there's many airports in the state that are in the same kind of locations as we do, having going to above ground tanks for the same reason why some of us have the concerns of going to them. So if you're going to hunt somewhere, you be aware of your surroundings, in my opinion. So if someone shoots a tank, then that's on them, in my opinion. But this isn't new ground. Coolidge isn't the first city looking at an above-ground tank in this kind of area. So I think other cities who have addressed these concerns in the same kind of areas have gone with the above ground. So I don't think it's something we should completely take off the table. Or if it was that big of a deal to put them underground, I don't see why it's become more popular to put them above ground, is what I'm getting at.
I can't step too far out of the scope of what I control.
I apologize. And it wasn't really directed to you. It's more Rick would probably be the man to address that to, I guess. But
yeah, in fact,
our fuel tank consultants could probably
yeah.
address it tonight.
You have any more? Are you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just quick question. from ADEQ perspective, really all you're worried about is us getting those tanks out of the ground, correct?
The old
How the old ones out of the ground. That's the environmental problem.
The primary focus is making sure we don't have a release into the environment.
Right.
So right now, with what we're looking at in the current state of what we're seeing for the inventory control and why is the last 12 months we haven't, getting good numbers there. And also from the 2009 interior inspection, it tells us that these tanks are probably on their last leg. And then just in general, we know they're over 30 years old, so we know they're probably on their last leg. So yes, the preferred probably is that those come out of the ground, and we would go with something that's new, something that's double-walled system. But under the current regulations, with the current situation, what we understand, the facts that we're aware of right now, we could not force you to pull those out of the ground. So that's not what we are doing at this point in time.
What I'm trying to distinguish is we need to get those out of the ground before they have an environmental issue. But as far as above ground or putting new ones back in the ground, you're not worried about that, right?
Correct.
That's kind of a Coolidge issue at that point.
Yes.
And we've got to make a decision what we want to do.
In the EPA studies, only if we move them, and moving them is only to make it pretty. When compared to what else is out there, I think pretty is the least of our concerns, in my opinion. But Rick, that's the only reason why we would have to pay the $150,000 studies if we move them to whatever location we decided we would move them to, if that's where they went. Correct?
As I was talking with the FAA, if we go anywhere other than over the top of the existing ones or immediately adjacent to the ones like we're doing with the proposed underground, we would have the environmental studies that adds cost and time delays.
So that added cost and times could be avoided if we above ground where we're at now or next to it.
Yeah, I think that's a good, your question, I've struggled with this, above versus below. I feel a little differently about the aesthetics, as does some of our tenants out there who have an investment in their properties and the future of what we're trying to do out there at the airport. So I think, we need to probably look at what the cost difference are between if there's a tremendous savings by putting them above ground versus below ground. Perhaps that is the best thing, but I'm not hearing that there's a tremendous savings in doing
what would be the savings? Because we've done a whole lot of in the future talk and the airport plan, all this revenue is going to happen years from now. Well, if we have above ground tanks, if we ever have an issue with an above ground tank, it will be cheaper to fix that problem than it would be an underground issue. And that was what I would think the cost saving would be. If it's going to save me, because we've already had this 30-year plan stuff going on, if it's in 30 years, if it's going to be cheaper to fix an above ground tank versus an underground tank, then it is a cost issue and it's something we should consider.
I'd like the experts that know how to install these systems address that. There are issues with above ground tanks that you don't have with below ground tanks. As I've studied the recent tests that I had to take, most of your leaks are going to occur in your piping system and not in your tank. Your tank's going to have a limited life anyway, like ours are currently, whether it's above or below. But I'd probably rather have them talk about the differences in costs and whether it's easier to replace an above ground or a underground.
Rick, I do have a question. How come we never considered the one in between? The one that is halfway in and halfway out? How come we never looked at that?
Well, let me kind of go back a little bit. When we did a request for proposals, we originally sent that out, even though it was the wrong thing to do. We sent it out as an above ground tank in the parking lot area. We got 2 proposals back, one from Fry and one from another company that I won't name. The other company's estimate for doing an above ground tank in the parking lot area was just shy of $1 million. I immediately thought, well, that's about twice as much as what we have budgeted. I don't know how we can possibly make that work. I don't know that we would get a different result if we went.
But an above ground tank above the existing tanks
Would save in piping and some other costs. We'll let them maybe address that.
Maybe we should do that because again, how about our insurance providers and things of that nature? I mean, what's the difference in the cost there? And are they willing to do underground tanks, or is it going to be less expensive to do above ground? Financing where are we going to be at with that? I mean, there's a lot of things that come into this rather than, because I don't know that I have a preference, but I think the other items that are involved in it are going to determine which way I'd like to go. So maybe we need to deal with some of those issues because maybe we should just move forward.
Let me maybe introduce Keith Lecker, and he can maybe, or Mike, whichever you prefer to maybe address some of these questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor. And
Thank
Council.
you, Travis. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, I'm Keith Lecker from Complete Aviation Fuel Systems. I work closely with Mike Fry with Fry Construction. I've been in the aviation fueling business and aviation since I've been 16, and I like to say I'm 39, but I'm not. So this is all I do. I've been taking care of the Coolidge Airport for Charlie and done probably 80–90% of the upgrades and the work and the computer system and all of that ever since he's been started in 2003, 2002, 2003, all the computer systems. I was involved. I don't get involved in the underground storage tanks certification and all of that. There's a third party that comes in. That's the company, I think it was Technologies, that came in and they did the inspection in 2009. And that's when the letter came back and says it was marginal. We were able to put a little pressure on ADQ supervisor at the time. He says, let's see what it looks like in 5 years. The inspector told us right then, the tank inspector guy from Technology says in 5 years I'm not going to pass it. So at that point we said we have to upgrade this tank. We started looking at it from, one of them's a steel tank and one's a fiberglass tank. When I think I first met Rick, I said, if you went out and buried your car 30 years, for 30 years and dug it up, what would you have? You have a 1/4-inch wall tank. So that tank set aside, we've been keeping it together. It works, it plugs fuel and everything else has been on discussion. The primary goal, I think all the drawings that I originally did for Charlie and over the years, we always wanted to put the tanks out in the parking lot and keep the aesthetics because of where the way the tank farm sits directly in the ramp area and blocks the access there. So if we put above ground, that was the original plan. I thought it was a good plan until the FAA kicked up and says, nope, you need a full environmental study if you're going to move anywhere in this thing. We just finished an environmental study. We don't do them. Engineering companies did them at a place we're putting in a tank farm in Escalante. And it took 14 months to get that done, start to finish. And that was a site that had fuel, but we moved the fuel location. So it took that long. Below ground tanks, I've been putting them in with Mike. Actually, Mike puts them in and I do the aviation part. I'm the aviation consultant to make sure everything meets all them aviation quality. Every gas station in the United States almost has below ground tanks. They're the safest thing. I think they're warranted for 30 years now, Mike. They come with a 30-year warranty. The life expectancy is much greater because they're not to deteriorate and everything else. With the new fuels and everything else, we're seeing different things, and ADQ's doing all sorts of studies with the fuels and how it's reacting. The fiberglass companies are changing and meeting those new needs. So as far as going above ground or below ground, our biggest concern was above ground's wonderful, is where do we put them? If you put them out there in front of your little terminal or your little thing, you have these things sitting out there and the possibility of an airplane wing strike and all of the different problems that we incur with putting anything on an airport above ground, whether it be light towers, buildings, or anything else. So.
Vice Mayor?
Yes.
When you were saying that putting them out there where the current tanks are now, I know that there are airports like Chandler. Theirs is right out there. They pull up there and fuel up, correct?
Correct. Well, Chandler has 2 fueling facilities. It has the city's fuel facility, which is underground storage tank, and the private FBO has an above ground storage tank. Most of the airports, because of land is large, they have space, they do above ground. They do above ground. Glendale went from below ground to above ground. Almost a lot of the airports are going above ground simply because they do have the space. What they do though is planning it. The master plan is a 15-year plan with it in ADOT. It's 10 years, but they're planning 15 years. So if you would put in the budget to do the AE and all of that, it would have been accomplished and we wouldn't be behind the 8 ball. But that we never got that done, and that just the tanks have been sort of this problem site, and now we're back against the wall, and we don't really have the time to do that type of study. As far as cost saving, there is real. I can tell you that an above ground tank, just the tank itself for a 12,000 gallon tank. They're fire rated, double wall, they meet all the new standards and everything else, about $125,000 now, between $100,000 to $125,000. That's just for the tank and equipment and fueling system.
So altogether, how much more or less is it to put above ground if we stayed in the same location? Which one's cheaper?
Yeah.
When we budgeted above ground, I'm sorry, I'm Mike Fry with Fry Construction. When we budgeted this project as an above ground tank, our budget was almost identical to the one that we presented Rick. The cost of a above ground storage tank is much higher than a below ground tank. And they're fire rated and ballistics rated nowadays. And so you can actually shoot them.
And they won't.
That's right.
Good.
So
you can still hunt out there.
Yeah.
From a cost standpoint, we figured it both ways, and when we talked with Rick and Charlie, we felt that the cost was extremely comparable. Very, very difficult to ferret out any real big cost differences, particularly if we're going to keep the features of this system the same. And the features of this system as proposed is going to be substantially more attractive than the system you have now. You're going to have much higher velocity pumping capability. You're still going to have the pay at the pump option where you can take credit cards from the self-serve sort of a scenario. You'll be able to filter the fuel into the tank, whether you do above ground or below ground, which you don't have now. And so with all the monitoring and all the accoutrements going on to this, above ground or below ground, the costs are going to be the same. Now, there are pluses and minuses for above ground tanks and below ground tanks. You have ample room. Most of the reasons why people would put below ground tanks in is because they don't have setback space from their buildings. They don't have room to do this. You rarely ever see a corner gas station with above ground tanks for that reason. You have an airport with ample space, plenty of space to find for an above ground tank. But I think Rick has talked about the disadvantage of going that way unless you locate it in the same place for those environmental impact reasons.
I have a question.
Okay, well, that's really what I wanted to.
Okay, hold on a minute. Mike, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
When you have in-ground tanks, you pay taxes to the county, right?
No, you pay it to the state.
State, okay.
It's a penny a gallon.
Is it the same with the above ground?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And with above ground tanks,
You're exempt.
you're exempt. Okay. And they don't have to be inspected by Arizona, or they do? No, they don't have to be inspected.
Well,
and so, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there seems to be some advantages to it, and you could, if it ever worked out, you could adjust we're talking about basically the same amount of money on your part. and you would still, dig out the other tank, the old tanks. And reading that, I see that if, obviously, that's a whole different issue. If we find some contamination, I noticed in your proposal that that's our problem, not yours, but you will tell us what it is.
Well, we're going to do a removal investigation.
Mm-hmm.
We'll bring a geologist in, take soil samples, analyze them, and give you a report suitable to submit to ADEQ. And if there is contamination, there's a process.
Okay, thank you. Those guys seem pretty reasonable.
Well,
to me.
you have insurance. That's what you carry insurance for.
We could get
I had something first.
So, hold on. Go ahead.
I actually had something sorry I forgot your name, but the gentleman that spoke before you, because we had one comment about the gas stations going underground, and you kind of answered something I was going to make a statement on. The reason why airports probably go above ground more than the gas stations because of space, like you said,
right.
correct? So comparing an airport to a gas station is an apple to an orange, in my opinion, and you kind of answered that, because I know there was a concern, well, gas stations go underground. Well, we're not a gas station, we're an airport. We have the space to do so. A small gas station, we have many of them in town. I can't see any of these ones going to an above ground because there's no room.
That's right.
We have plenty of room, so I
plenty of
don't
room.
think that is even an issue.
Well, and as Rick pointed out, this is a large airport, and if you put them in the ground somewhere, they're going to be there forever, pretty much. But if you have them above ground, and you want to change things around at the airport, I guess you can move them. But I mean,
There's one thing that I might like to address. While we have plenty of room at the airport, we don't have a lot of room when it comes to the environmental study. We have to be either on top of the tank or immediately adjacent.
Okay.
Immediately
Yeah,
adjacent really doesn't work. So it only would work if it was immediately above the tanks that are there, because otherwise we're getting too close to the buildings above ground, which may, I think from a setback standpoint. The other issue is how much time are we going to be off not fueling aircraft that need the fuel while the underground is taken out and the new ones are installed. There's more lag time, where in the other method, you're fueling the whole time these other tanks are installed, and the downtime between these two systems is very minimal. You might want to talk about how long we potentially could be without fuel unless we find someone that's going to supply it at probably an increased cost by putting in skids and other things to do that.
Well, depending on how much you use, you might just bring a truck out.
Who's going to fuel it on the truck?
Well, you'd have to have someone doing that.
So now we don't have anybody.
Someone would have to be trained to operate the truck. This probably isn't. I did want to mention something. I've built several aviation fuel facilities, and it's an interesting business arrangement when you have a municipal airport and a fixed base operator. I know you made some comments about why don't you let the tenants put the fuel in. I thought the same thing the first time I worked at an airport. And an old FBO schooled me on that. He told me that, if they want to get us in there to service the flying public, the general aviation public that uses the airport, we've got to be able to have some revenue, some income. And fuel is one of the things that the FBO relies on. He's an amenity to your airport and the flying public out there. If all of your tenants put their own fuel tanks in, it would dry a revenue source for him up. And then the city may not be able to attract an FBO to operate. And then there would be expenses to replace what that FBO does for you. And just small airports all over the state have the same politics. They have an FBO that survives on fuel sales and rental revenue and service, maintenance, that sort of thing. And you almost have to grant him the monopoly out there for that in order for him to survive. Otherwise, it's just very uncompetitive to get someone in there. Sure.
Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor, Councilman. Also, I'd like to add, I owned Glendale Aviation for 14 years, from 1993 through 2006, I believe is when we sold it. And we had underground storage tanks, and we always wanted to go above ground because of the same aging problem and everything else. The one thing that you do not want to happen is what happened at Glendale. We sold our business in 2006, and the new, in the deal, they removed the underground storage tanks and put in their own above-ground storage tanks. Well, that company went bankrupt, and the tanks were frozen by the bankruptcy court. And that went on. So as long as there's one fuel provider, the city must retain ownership of that. When you get larger and there's 2 FBOs, then it allows you to build their own and everything else, like at Scottsdale, at these different places. But all of the airports, I've been involved about, also work as a professional witness at Gila Bend. They had a private contractor with a 5,000-gallon tank out there. He didn't fulfill his end of the contract. They turned left. It locked up. It cost the city over $1 billion in damages in a contract dispute. So that from experience, all of these small airports, the city owns the fueling system and leases it to an operator. Payson, Casa Grande does their own. Coolidge, Gila Bend does their own. All these small airports, the city owns there until there's multiple FBO owners. Yes, ma'am.
While we're down, putting in the new tanks and stuff, won't the supplier of the fuel bring in a tanker truck?
The supplier will always help you out with tanker trucks. The biggest challenge is to get them here, and it could cost as much as $3,000 a truck because we have to bring them in from wherever there are. At this current time, at Super Bowl's happening, we have a whole plethora of trucks in here. So the trucks will be here. But within 30 days after Super Bowl, those trucks will be departing back to their homes. So they brought in all this special work for Deer Valley and World Fuel and Ab Fuel, and all the different vendors have brought in fuel trucks to help their customers out for this time. Those trucks will be available for a short period. Otherwise, the lease on a truck is anywhere from about $800 to $2,500 a month, depending on the size per product. And the cost to ship it, a lot of times your fuel vendor will supply those, let you have them for a short period, lease free, but the cost, they make you ship them from their home, which could be in Texas, could be in New Jersey, could be anywhere, ship them to you, and you have to pay to ship them back. And then you have, in a truck, currently you have a credit card system that's a 24 hours, just like you go to a gas station, you put in your credit card, it authorizes the sale of the phone line, and then it turns on and dispenses so many gallons. It's a self-serve. There's no, with a fuel truck, we'd have to get you, make sure that everybody's trained how to use it, and you would not have that 24-hour service, because you would actually have a person. Yes, sir?
If we go above ground, you're saying we can't fuel in that process, but if we stay underground, don't we have to rip the tanks up, put the new ones in? So how are we fueling in that process versus the other one?
The plan is to go adjacent, put the new tank system in, this one is continue to work, and minimal downtime, or a week or two that we would have a downtime of the cross connect.
But as stated before, the above ground tanks can go directly above or just adjacent as well. And nowhere else, just
the location adjacent would be putting them in front of the hangar door of the old hangar.
Okay.
So that's the adjacent spot for the below grounds is going to the north. To the north, in that space by the old hangar that got retrofitted. So they're going below ground and won't block that door. If we go above ground in that same location, they'll block that door.
The immediate problem is getting the old tanks out of the ground. Do we have to, as far as the contract's concerned, can't we just take care of the first part and then make decisions on the second part as far as above or below? Or does it have to be simultaneous?
Together. Asking the wrong guy. You need to ask the attorney.
You want any fuel?
The immediate need is to get the tanks out of the ground to comply. Can we do it in 2 stages? Can we talk about whether we go above or below while we just get the tanks out of the ground and then decide, get the tanks going, get them out of the ground?
I think it might be.
I think that the only issue is, again, downtime. We don't, when tanks come out of the ground, well, the minute they start decommissioning those tanks, you don't have any fuel out there for for the tenants. That's what we're trying to avoid, is having a continuous flow of fuel for our tenants that are depending on that, and then take the other ones out.
Rick, question.
Go ahead.
So the above ground, the way, if they go to the north, they're going to be blocking the hangar. Why can't they go to the south?
Then they're right in front of the FBO office. And then you're pretty close with those above ground storage tanks. The fire chief is here, but I think there's also a separation requirement from your fueling facility and these buildings.
There's a tank to building, important building setting, spacing, and then a dispenser to important building setting as well. There's not enough space to put the 2 tanks out there between the 2 buildings. With the dispenser would be too close to the building, so then they have to go forward. It's just a whole spacing issue of where, with the existing tank system that's out there, because we can't go on top without removing. We'll have a hole that's
30 by 40.
30 by 40 that we remove to remove those tanks, and the other tanks will have to have a structure in such a way that they wouldn't collapse into it.
Mayor? Yes. Would it be an advantage for the council to go out and visually see what you're talking about?
Sure.
I mean, actually see, and if you move the tank, where the above-ground tanks would be moved, and the aesthetics to that, versus where, just putting them in place where they are now, versus being in place of a hangar door, or whatever the case would be. It's hard to look at a map or look at this and visually see, and we're not only looking at today, but we're looking at 5 years or 10 years from now. And if you grow, how is that going to affect where the tanks are if we put it above ground? I can't visually look at a map or look at this and see, but if I go out and look at it, I could probably see, well, this might not work, or this could possibly work. Mayor, would that be an advantage to the council to be doing that?
Well, I can't speak for the rest of them, but I think it would be, for me, and I've been out there, as have you guys, many, many times, but to go out and actually look at it, I think, I mean, we still have a ways to go when it comes to financing and things of that nature. We haven't heard about that. Advantages, disadvantages, I think we all recognize we have to get them out of the ground. But maybe, and I don't know, maybe we move forward with a business item and we vote to do it with the option that we can determine above ground or below ground if the price is going to be very similar, and we can get started, he can get started working on getting the tanks, do what they have to do. Whether we go in ground or above ground, we can certainly make that decision after we go out. I mean, we go out Saturday morning for that matter. Well, you're working though, but.
No, I'm off this Saturday. I've got an appointment about 10 o'clock in the morning, but I mean.
We can be there
I mean,
8 o'clock, it's light, so.
yeah, I mean, I could be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I'm a visual type of person.
Yeah.
I can visually see it and decide,
Hold on.
it makes sense or doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one of the things I just want to make clear is I don't mind above ground tanks. I mean, it's not that. It's the issue of timing and what we have time, because if we put them in the apron right above, then you have a potential, they mentioned it earlier, of a wing strike on the tank. And I don't know that our insurance would, I don't know what it does to our insurance to have those tanks out in the apron where the planes go. I don't know. I mean, I'm asking. But the issue is the timing. I mean, if we had all the time in the world, yeah, I mean, put them up and put them behind and run the lines, all that. But I'm worried about the fact that they're already past due as far as how long they're going to stay. And I know we're only talking a little bit of extra time, but I'm still very concerned because obviously ADQ's here, and they know that these things are. It's the insurance, the fact that the engineering I think is already done for putting them below ground. So wouldn't that require to go back and redo some of the engineering on moving them to above ground, doing that? And is there a cost to that, or would you not charge for that? And then, but also the time. I mean, if you move them too far out and you have some other issues, the environmental time is the one that's going to be the issue. I think in my opinion, we have to provide fuel. I think Charlie's done an excellent job of getting the airport use up and bringing more people in. So it's contractually and just ethically, it's fair to allow him to have fuel out there, because he's done a lot of work, invested a lot of money out there, and there's a lot of other people out there too. So anyway, those are my concerns. I'm not opposed to above ground. I'm just thinking it's a timing issue of this is the easiest way to get at it, get those tanks out and get it done. And, in the future.
I agree with your concerns. They're all valid concerns. I do think, though, that Mr. Fry mentioned that initially it was going to be above ground tanks, so I think that they probably already put in some of the homework there. I think Mr. Miller could probably figure out a way to get some fuel out there between now and then with the supplier, and maybe Mr. Recker, obviously, we're going to have to work something out. I don't know how many people come in at midnight and gas up, but we got to do, I mean, when I look at this, I appreciate everything Gilbert said, and I appreciate everything the FBO has done out there, but this is the city of Coolidge airport, and we have to do what's best for us now and in the future, and I think that, it depends on what we determine once, we take a look at it and go from there. I know you had something. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
I just want to say that I have gone around and visited some airports, and the ones that have the above ground, and if any of the council members have the opportunity, I suggest that maybe you guys do the same thing. I don't see a problem with them. The aesthetics, if I understood right, the above ground tanks can be put in and the underground tanks can be taken out, or the tanks have to be taken out before the
Yeah, I want to make it pretty clear. I don't want to mislead the council at all. I want to make sure you understand clearly that there is not an option to put above ground tanks either to the right or to the left or to the north or to the south of the current tanks that are underground. The only way you're going to be able to possibly put above ground tanks in there is immediately above the existing tanks, which is going to create a very large delay for where we have to have somebody out there fueling out of a truck or something else.
Why do you say we can't go to the south?
Because you're going to be too close to the other office building with your above ground tanks. You'll be right in front of their parking lot. They have to dig a big hole to take these existing tanks out, and if you move them over, these tanks above, you're going to be right in front of the parking lot, in front of Charlie's FBO office. And to the north of the tanks, you're going to be right in front of the old hangar doors. And I'm not a fire code expert, and I wish you'd probably address.
I have a question for Lisa,
you know
too.
What the separation is, Rob, on the fire separation? Okay.
Of course he doesn't.
There is a separation, like we mentioned earlier, between the above ground tanks and these existing buildings.
Sorry.
Wood hangar.
So 15 feet, we have that. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Lisa, when we were talking previously about the above ground, you said that there were banks that were willing to loan on the above ground, and you're having not that much luck on the below ground, correct?
I actually was wondering if that might be the case, because our bids were due last Friday and I did not receive one. However, this week I did receive a letter of interest from Bank of the West stating that since we had banked with them for such a long time, that they would be willing to loan us the entire amount on the project. However, I've not seen and actually, we would have to talk about how we would receive those, whether we would actually have to go back out to bid because they did not come in by last Friday, or if we would go forward with the local bank in the city's best interest, in which case you'd have to waive the bidding requirements. I did receive an actual bid from one of the other institutions this week, which again, I cannot use because they did not come in by Friday, that also is willing to bid on the full amount of removing the tanks and replacing them with the new in-ground tanks. I would like to mention a couple of things. So before are we actually, Dennis, are we in item number 3 or are we actually in item 4? Because
we're still in item 3.
That's
but
good,
it's,
though.
It's run amok. So
no,
Dennis,
actually, item 3 is good
I want to move
because
into item number 4. I think we've.
I don't know that I could discuss financing under item number 4, but I could under number 3.
Hold on, Councilmember. What I want to do is I want to move into the business section. Item number 4, consider approval of entering into a contract for jet fuel and VA gas facility construction and decommissioning of existing fueling facility at the Coolidge Municipal Airport between the City of Coolidge and Fry Construction, Inc. for the removal and reconstruction of underground storage tanks. Okay.
Honorable Mayor, Dennis, I can still discuss it under this item as well. It's just the way it's agendized is kind of strange. Just a couple of things for everyone, to realize. When we budgeted for this project, we budgeted to receive a loan and to pay the payments out of capital sales tax money. Capital sales tax money is still frozen. We talked on the 12th about changing this item, but because it was tabled, it came right back before you in exactly the same wording. So if we approve this tonight and we have to front those costs, I can't do that yet because capital has not been unfrozen. And Dennis, I don't know if we can add that to this item, and we cannot. So it's still not agendized to be able to use those funds. However, if we didn't spend any of the funds until we received the loan, then we're not using capital until July of this year. But my guess is, because we have to remove those tanks, we will actually have to spend that money up front and get reimbursed from the loan.
So basically what you're telling me is the only thing that's changed is we've received a lot of information, but we can't go forward with it.
And that would be up to the attorney. Yeah, when this went, and we talked about this the morning after we met with council on the 12th, and I thought that this would be changed in here, but this did not go back before any of us to approve because it had just simply been tabled and moved to the next meeting. So yes, that language should have been added to here before it came back before you tonight. But then even last week I was thinking this was going back before as a discussion item. But I'm assuming, Rick, that you just didn't think to change the actual language. Because we talked about it on the 12th, the fact that it wasn't unfrozen, needed to be unfrozen. I think there's still a couple of issues too. Norma, did we find out for sure if our insurance does cover contamination if those wells are pulled?
The only thing, when I went back, Honorable Mayor and Council, when I went back and looked at the policy, it talked about the 3 things that it covered, and one of them was the, and I'm not going to remember right now off the top of my head, but it's corrective action, and 2 other ones, and I'm sorry because I don't have that in front of me, but that's all it states that the insurance company that I have to apply with every year, that's all it's telling me that it's covering. I don't know if it'll go back and cover if we have contamination in the ground or leaking, or I don't know for sure. I think it depends on the issue, the matter, and if we have to file a claim with our insurance carrier or the insurance carrier that is insuring our tanks, if it's a covered item or not. So I don't have that in front of me.
Right.
But
I just wanted to make sure that you had all of the information on what the cost could be when you start looking at whether to go below ground or above ground, whichever that may be.
And is there, did you get any of that? Can you tell us, is there a big difference in the interest rate?
For above ground or below ground?
Yeah, one or the other.
The only thing that I have sent to the banks right now is the information that I have on pulling the old tanks and putting in new below ground tanks, because that's what the estimate is for.
Okay. I think we've done about a, you know, this was, I believe we all thought this was going to be a work session anyway.
I think so.
And then that we could have voted. Now, for me, the main items are the financing and the insurance. And I thank Arizona EDQ for coming out. I think they can see that we are sincere and we are going to take action. Obviously, it hasn't been changed here. We can't take any action tonight, but I think this will be on the next agenda for a vote. We can actually vote on it and get done with it. So I don't want to, Councilmember Lewis, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I've been wanting to ask for a little bit. I think we have people in the audience who are actual customers at the airport who fly in and use the fuel system. Is there anything we can hear on their opinions on above ground? Since they're the ones flying in and there was comments made, well, the airplane might hit it. If they're the ones flying in and fueling, can we hear from them? If there's anybody that would
want to
like
say
to.
anything, they're certainly welcome to speak.
Dennis, they can speak under this item, right?
I know there's at least one that I don't know everybody, but it would help us to get your opinion. That's what I feel anyway.
Okay.
We got Charlie, too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Honorable Mayor, Council, my name's Steve Kelly. I use the airport and I fly and I buy fuel. And I haven't been buying fuel here for 4 months because it's cheaper at other airports. So, but Charlie did drop his price down to $5.04, and I just about bought fuel there. But then I found out Wickenburg, who just got done with Keith here. It took them a year to do the project, not a few months, right? How long did it take you to do Wickenburg, Keith?
The construction of the time of contract.
How long was the time of the contract?
We were over by 4 months.
Why?
My son came back from Afghanistan and had
We need to direct counsel. We don't need.
Okay. Mr. Kelly?
Okay, so anyway, we can get by without fuel at the airport for a while.
And I think we can work something out if it
We can
ever
work
came to
something out.
that,
But it is nice having fuel at the airport also.
Okay.
I've seen it both ways.
Okay, so
But-
it is.
No more
but
the
we-
opinion on the above.
But what do you want to know? I mean, what do you want to do?
I wanted more of the opinion because there's been debate on the safety versus above versus below. As a pilot,
I
using the
as a
airport-
pilot, like above-ground tanks for several reasons. If they're buried and underground, I really have no idea what I'm pumping into the airplane. If there's water contamination in the fuel, we can't easily figure that out. If it's above ground, you can actually walk around the tank like you walk around the airplane, and you have an idea what condition the fuel in the tank is in.
Okay.
So that is a big advantage, along with other considerations as far as the tank is an asset. When it's above ground, you can borrow money on it. I think Lisa will find that out. If it's below ground, it's more of a liability for the city. Anything else?
Thank you. That's what I was wanting
Right.
to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Recker, did you want to make any comments, or are you okay?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor,
Good evening.
Council. My name is Charlie Recker. I'm with Coolidge Aviation. I've been in aviation for a bigger part of 45 years. I learned to fly and got a license in 1961. We have flown basically all over the world. For health reasons, I've quit flying heavy equipment. When I say heavy, I'm not flying that heavy. I fly C-130, DC-7. Looks like we found out today I might be going to China in DC-8 doing some contract work back and forth. But we came to Coolidge after 35 years out on the reservation, Memorial. And we came to Coolidge after we'd looked at Prescott, Wickenburg, My partner, Woody Grantham, owns a large ranch in Wickenburg. And we thought, you know, for his purposes of being close to his headquarters, that's where we would be. Wickenburg didn't want the growth in the large aircraft. They still don't. I had looked at Coolidge. Woody had looked at Coolidge. I've flown fire tankers out of Coolidge, so I know what's here. We've been in the recreation business also, and I saw a sleeper. This airport is not going to get built in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. But in the next 10 to 15 years, you've got such a diamond in the rough here that's coming together. And to answer your question, I'm sorry about coming around the bush a little bit, but to answer your question about above ground and below ground, look at your major airports. A lot of them have above ground, but believe me, security-wise, you can't get close to them. And the fuel is typed into Sky Harbor, into Wickenburg, underground, and they're fueled right out of the ground. We had originally thought it would be cheaper to go above ground, but the FAA imposed some things that I wasn't aware of. Mr. Miller found out. We thought originally it would be better to put the above ground out behind the office and run a trench, a concreted trench covered, and put the pipe in that. When it was all said and done, it was not the cheapest. And so you ask the difference between above ground and below ground from a pilot standpoint, there is no difference. Aesthetics, below ground looks better. What are we trying to do with the airport? We're trying to make it functional, but we want to make it look where somebody wants to come in and not be the typical square hangar facility. Any other questions? I'd be glad to try to answer it.
Good, sir. Thank you, Mr. Ricker.
Yep.
All right, Dennis. Does anybody else have any comments they'd like to make? Mr. Fry, I apologize. We're going to get this agenda sized, so we will vote on this at our next regular scheduled meeting.
And Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think it's agendized to approve the agreement, but so if you wanted to approve the agreement, but my understanding is, at least from listening, some council members would like the opportunity to visit the airport so they get a better visual in the agreements for a below ground tank. So.
Well, that and, you know, the interest rates, and there's still a question about the insurance. I mean, I want to do what is right for us now, but in the future, and I don't want to run into any issues with us going a certain way and then finding out that it's going to cost us, if we can get insurance, it's going to cost us a fortune. So I think that those are things that I wanted to know about tonight, in all honesty. And so I would like that information the next time that we have a meeting. I would like to know how much, if it matters to our insurance companies, if it's above ground or below ground, and if there's a difference in the insurance. And there was another issue, wasn't there?
Financing. You said your two issues were financing and insurance.
Yeah. And we'll have to do something with unfreeze the capital so we can finally, we'll have to reword our item, our agenda item, so we can actually take some action. Because if I understand Lisa correctly, if we can authorize it, but we can't do anything really, we can't pay them.
I'm sorry, I should have said Nancy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Dan Gallegos. I'm with the World Fuel Services. World Fuel is a fuel provider globally for aviation, land, and marine. We do.
Spell your last name, please.
Gallegos. My background is in aviation fuel. I do it every day. I'm on every airport. I have 13 states. My company represents more than 1,100 FBOs around this country. This is normal for me. We do this all the time. My background before I came to work for World, and I still do it for World, is I worked for a tank manufacturer. I installed tanks. This is what I'm used to. A lot of what Mr. Lecker does, an excellent job. Great, you guys do wonderful work. Above ground tanks are assets. Underground tanks aren't. Part of the reason that you struggle with a loan is because World does this as well. World does loan money for these things, is because one is an unsecured asset and one is secured. We give much different rates on those. If I can pull the asset back because the payment's not being made or something's happened, I have that. It's a completely different animal than it is if it goes underground. Once it goes underground, it's gone. If it's above ground and there's a problem with it, I certainly can take it. If you have an issue with the airport's expanding, moving, they want to change something, you can relocate the tanks. You build a new pad, you reset them. You're done. You don't have to deal with everything underground that goes along with it. The FAA, when it comes to doing the environmental study, I've put tanks in all over the place. I realize it does happen. It may happen. But I guess I would probably challenge that a little bit because it happens all over the place without it. I have a guy who's putting 2 tanks in Pinellas County right now, one at Kearney at the airport. And he's already gone through all this with Pinellas County, and it wasn't a requirement. Not at all was it a requirement to do that. There was a matter of fact, he said it was a very easy process to get this done through permits. Simple. Move the tanks off site, move them away that it works a little bit better, you're done. So I'm wondering if the environmental impact study has to do with running the piping from the tank underground out to a dispenser. Most tanks nowadays, if you build above grounds, they built the dispensing right on the front of the tank. It's all an integral part of it. The pads contain, the tank set down, it's easy. So that's pretty common for all places. As far as a couple other things I heard, allowing other people to use fuel at the airport. That happens all the time. Generally, the FAA says, and this is that Part 16 issue, if the FBO can have fuel, the FBO sells the fuel. If somebody else wants to put fuel in the airport, they can, but for their own use, they can't sell as well. If you don't allow that, generally the other person can challenge it, and if they challenge it and win, the FAA can come back and pull all their funding for the airport. So there's another part of that is the issue. So mostly people can use fuel for their own use. These are just, again, I apologize. There's just some of the things I'm hearing, and I have a background in this. This is what I've been doing for years. The fuel supplier for trucks, absolutely. I bring trucks in all the time. He's right. I've probably got 10 trucks in here right now for Super Bowl, and they will be out of here. But I also will bring them in for special events. I'll bring them in for things like this. And World's policy is not to charge for that. Maybe other suppliers do. Our policy isn't for that. If you're going to keep it an extended period of time, more than 6 months, well, yeah. I have insurance on that truck. I have other costs in that truck. I do need to recoup some of that. That's all I ask, is that you make me whole, not just to make it so it doesn't go backwards for me. That's all we ask. So there's a lot of stuff that I involved in doing this. Again, I think that most of this, in my opinion, revolves around this environmental impact study and if it is real or not. If it doesn't really exist and you don't really have to do it, above ground tanks sound like they can go anywhere and it's not really a big deal. So I think that all of this hinges around, does that really matter? Is that really the truth? And does that really have to happen? And I'm not challenging that that's not what you found out. It's just not normal that I've seen it everywhere else. It's not a normal everyday thing. And Keith, you've been through it. You know as well. I mean, there probably have been sites that haven't had to do it. I'm not putting you on the spot, but there's probably sites you haven't had to do it as well.
I originally, when we originally planned, we planned to move the tanks, not even thinking about the environmental stuff. I mean, that was our original plan.
Yeah.
It came up late in the game.
Wouldn't the DEQ guys right there, wouldn't you know?
Well, I apologize, but ADEQ really doesn't get involved in the above ground tanks. They kind of go away from that. So
Okay.
it's FAA, and if you go underground, the EPA gets involved.
EPA and FFA regulations.
Yeah, and the EPA is impacted. And as far as things like we mentioned before, the taxes, there is an underground storage tax for fuel. We do charge that. You are exempt if it's above ground. So there is certainly costs that go along with that. My company does provide insurance as well We do that because we do all this. We do environmental insurance, we do liability insurance, we do hangar keepers insurance. It's all part of it. It's all a package that World Fuel provides. There are different rates, and it does matter. It certainly does. So, anyway, I apologize.
No, thank you, Mr. Gallegos. I appreciate it. That was very informative. And I would say thank everybody for their patience, because ordinarily it doesn't take the council this long, but this is a $500,000 purchase if we don't find anything under there that is hazardous waste. So we want to make sure we do the right thing. So does anybody else have anything?
I have a question. I think it's probably for Lisa, and I don't see her here anymore. There she is. Mr. Gallegos' company, the World Fuels, were they involved? Were they given the opportunity to submit a bid for all this as well?
Well, I apologize. We don't bid on fuel systems to do that. My company will provide money for that. We
Okay.
do that. We have FBOs come to us and ask us for loans. We have cities that come and ask for loans. We do provide money. We don't buy the tanks.
If we came to the point where we needed the fuel truck service to fuel the planes while we went with above ground, if that's what we chose and stuff, your company is something we can look at to provide those services like you've said.
I could, but Mr. Recker has another supplier, so I wouldn't give him a lease contract.
Okay.
So that's somebody else. His Atfield may do this as well.
Okay.
That's it. I'm sorry.
Good. Okay.
Well, I guess I have one question. If we did do the above ground and we did the whole study to move them, you had said that your last project that you did, that took about 14 months?
14 months. Armstrong Construction did the work. Armstrong Consulting did the work at Escalante, Utah.
So if we did go that route, could we continue running the same tanks we have right now while we go through that whole study and put the above ground, so that way we don't have to have a truck come in, and once the above ground in the new location is complete, we can just switch from the current to? Could we do that if we decided to go that route?
During the study parts, what are you talking about? Right?
From the start to finish of moving the tanks, since they don't fit anywhere but directly above right now, if we did decide to put them above ground, because in the long run it's cheaper, because we don't have to do the $8,000 testing and we don't have to pay the state. So could we continue running the current tanks right now while we go through that study to move them and put the new tanks above ground?
I'm gonna get some information from FAA to kind of put to bed the issue of whether there's an environmental study. I've got lots of emails, but the answer to that question is the cost of that study is about $100,000, and that doesn't get you anything, but just the study.
$100,000 study, but we save $8,000 a year on testing, right? So in about 11 years, whatever, we recoup that?
It's 5 years, isn't it? The testing is every 5 years?
Every 5 years.
Okay.
We're behind on the
So
test.
100 years, I'm sorry. All right. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miller. And I'm not so sure, they're here, I'm not so sure the 14-month timeline would, if we'd be able to work out a plan, since they're already sending us letters. So I'm going to ask, but I know the answer. Would you consider that if we went that way, but ADQ? You'd have to. Okay, thank you, I'm sorry. And I think I know what the answer is, so, but I had to ask. But anyway, go ahead.
I think that the worry would be that in that time frame it would leak, and then
Yeah.
we would have a different issue,
Yeah.
because we could have taken action before and we waited, and now we have a different problem. As you mentioned before, we'd have a different issue,
Yeah.
liability-wise. And then the insurance company may say, you had a chance to fix it, you didn't do it, we're not covering it. It's like they do on other things when, it's like you build a house, you don't get permits, burns up, well, you didn't hire an electrical contractor, I mean, there's things insurance companies won't pay for when you don't take the right steps, so, anyway.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else have anything?
I just have one quick one. We obviously have to get them out of the ground. We want to get them out of the ground. Deciding in between above or below, we're working on that too. In the meantime, are we under contractual obligation? You mentioned something in the last thing you said from World. Is that even an option to take bids, Charlie, between do we have to go with the one you already have for a
I
supplier?
think, for a supplier, that's.
For a supplier for a truck to
that's-
come?
No, that's Charlie's. I
Okay.
believe. So, I think we've all heard about enough tonight. Let me, do we have to agendicize it? If we want to meet out there, say it gets dark, it gets light around 7:30, kind of, sort of.
Yes.
Well, we're not going to wait all day if you can't get up, you need to. You going to go on a cruise or what? I mean, come on. But maybe, around, because I know Councilmember Hudson has a meeting or an appointment at 10.
I believe it is.
Can you be there at 8, or would that?
Yeah, I can let you know tomorrow.
Okay. Well, then we're going to.
I could probably go out and meet Rick or Charlie.
Yeah,
or
and
somebody,
just take care.
tomorrow, Friday, or whatever the case may be, or Sunday.
Because I think if there's going to be more than 4 of us, we need to.
That's correct.
We need to notify, so maybe, I don't know if Rick can be there at somebody, Charlie, I don't know if somebody would be there at 8 o'clock to show us where it's at least. Where the original tanks are, if we come out at 8 o'clock Saturday morning, can you okay, then that's what we'll do. For those of you who want to make it, we'll be there.
If not, I'll call Charlie and
Okay.
and have my own thing.
All right. Yes. Oh, I know. Well, this gives me an excuse to leave my rake in the truck for a while. But, yeah, you didn't even feed us at the last one we went to. But anyway,
Mayor, just for clarification on direction, it's posting a special meeting or notice, for Saturday, January 23rd at 8 a.m. at the airport
yes, ma'am.
to get a visual at the airport facility. Also to get clarification on the insurance coverage and then the financing. That's what
Yes.
you're wanting to.
But that's not Saturday. You're
That's
No,
not
no, no.
Saturday.
That's to come back on the January
That's
26th.
on the next
Okay.
meeting. We want to get this done. Everybody up here wants to get it done. I think
Saturday's just to inspect,
Saturday's just to go out and look and see where the tanks are at.
right, and discuss
And
possible
discuss
placement
possible placement.
of the
Okay.
fuel tanks. Okay.
Okay.
And then the other ones are for the next.
For the next,
Because,
yeah, right.
I mean, there were some good points brought up. We'd like to know how many gallons are going through there, and we'd like to know, what kind of impact it's going to have. And I'd like to see an alternative plan. If it does go, I don't know which way it's going to go above ground, because a lot of it's going to depend on financing and insurance.
Correct.
I don't see a reason to change a whole lot of other things. Mr. Fry and his associates have done a good job here. We're delaying them, but this is a big purchase for us. You have to understand, $500,000 for Coolidge is quite a bit of money. So we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. We may not all agree on what the right thing is, but we all want to do the right thing. So we will vote next time, and we will come to a decision. So I thank you for your patience. And everybody else that had input tonight, thank you very much. Thank you guys for coming down.
Yes.
We're not always this, most of the time we're okay. So please forgive us. Thank you very much. Do we need anything else, or can I motion to adjourn?
Second.
Do we need the item tabled then, since it was for discussion and action?
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Or are we just abandoning? Because there's an option to abandon as well.
well, we still need to approve the contract at the next meeting. So, yeah, we can table the item,
Okay, then
table this and bring it back, but we can,
I'd have to ask for a motion to table item number 4.
Can you change it then? Is it?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, right. Yeah, we can table it with direction that we've received tonight, yeah.
You can still change the item.
All right. And that's what we'll do.
Okay.
I'll ask for a motion to table
Motion to
it
table it.
Second.
and ask that it be changed so we can actually do something next time that we gather and vote. Okay, and there's a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you, everybody.
Now the motion to adjourn.
Now, a motion to adjourn? Nobody's going to want to go.
Yeah, no,
A
everyone wants to
motion to
stay.
adjourn.
Second.
All right. Motion to second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we're done.
Oh, aye.
Oh.